Um, we've been working with the nut growers for over 2 decades, and Bob, he's got a real good hook line, man. And you know, and he told me a story about all these older folks that were growing nuts, and this bank of wisdom that was out there in this aging population that was just going nowhere. You know, nobody, the next generation wasn't picking it up, nobody was writing it down, or maybe it wasn't well recorded anywhere. And it just, you know, I hate lost history, especially when it has a good purpose for today. And so we started trying to promote nut growing. We kind of like real quickly figured out that if we did some kind of combination between making crop grade nuts available to folks and making a membership available to the Nut Growers Association, where they could actually hang out with people who really are this current bank of knowledge about what it takes to grow chestnuts, and what it takes to grow walnuts, and what it takes to grow heart nuts, and ultra northern pecans, and hazelnuts. And so we have been rotating those species through our annual tree sale. We don't take any money from Soil and Water. We do make some profit on some of the other plants that we sell, but we wanted to remove any of that from us and just really promote the nut growers. The more I learn about this organization, it is truly my favorite group to work with because of their generosity, not just, you know, in the information that they share. They're just generous people. They want you to come to dinner, they want you to hang out, they drive all over the state to share the knowledge that they have. And they have not had support from any of the research that goes on. If you are a grain grower, there's all kinds of money and all kinds of research into equipment and making a seed that'll stand up to everything on the planet, being able to produce more. None of that money is going into nuts. And so, but yet, you have these people, and some of them are in this room with you today, that they do research on their own property, and they have been improving genetics for decades of the nuts that they grow, and they're doing the same caliber research that university professors are getting paid to do. And so I just don't think there's any other group on the planet that's quite like the nut growers. And I don't know if every other state is blessed enough. I know we have some folks that travel here from Pennsylvania. I don't know if y'all have that quality over there, but Ohio nut growers are where it's at, man. And so we're glad to have you here. Bob Stehli is going to be our presenter today, and we're going to talk about chestnuts. The tree that we have in our sale this year is chestnuts, and we do have some order forms. If you want to order some, you can talk with us after the fact, and we can help you out with that. So, Bob? Did you do the clicker, Anthony?
Yeah.
Bob, I'm going to turn a couple lights up here so they can see a little better. Is that better?
Okay. Yeah, that looks good to me. Well, I'm Bob Stehli. My wife, Murray, and I have a farm up here in Portage County, up in Manaway. And we started out with Christmas trees up there. And then I had kind of a lifelong love affair with the chestnut tree, and it wasn't until I probably got to be maybe in my late 30s that I had a chance to pursue that. But once we got our farm, I got started. My idea was to kind of try and resurrect the American chestnut, and we got going with that. And after a few years, we realized that after we joined the Northern Nut Growers and Ohio Nut Growers and Society of Ontario Nut Growers, that there really wasn't any hope for the American chestnut to breed our way out of the problem that it had with chestnut blight. because they simply don't have the genetics to fight that blight. And that's how we got started, but somewhere along the way we kind of changed gear and decided that with the way the forests were disappearing, that kind of thing, that probably the best way to preserve the chestnut tree was to make man dependent on it. And we kind of took a totally different tack, and we started collecting chestnut trees that had variable genetics from all the major species and crossbreeding them to kind of create a super species that would have genetic resistance to all the different diseases on the different continents that were all likely to come over here eventually, and pests as well. And so that's been kind of our life work, and what we've been doing for the last 30 years or so. And we hooked up with Lynn a long time ago, and as she said, Ohio nut growers and soil and water have done really well together. And in a lot of cases, we've been able to we've been able to direct soil and water in a lot of cases to take nut trees that do well for people in this area and get them started planting those. And it's a wonderful thing, because generally they will be successful with those. We had the experience to figure out which ones will do well, and then they've carried on some of our research too by doing that. And some of the trees that are going to be offered in this sale coming up in the spring are some of our best trees that we really do want to get out there. At any rate, that's kind of an introduction. I wanted to start by giving a little bit of update on what's going on in the chestnut industry. I know there's some people that I'm going to go through what we do on the farm a little bit later, but it kind of breaks down into two different areas: the American chestnut and the cropping chestnut. And on the American chestnut, the main drivers in trying to resurrect the American chestnut is the American Chestnut Foundation. And they started about 30 years ago doing a backcross program. And they took some American chestnuts that were still there, backcrossed them with some highly resistant Chinese chestnut. And they figured they would have to do a certain number of backcrosses to get a tree that was about 98% American or somewhere in there, that had the genetic resistance from the Chinese. There was a little flaw in that, because they assumed that there were only a couple genes involved. Initially they thought there was only one, and it turned out after a while they realized, well, there's more than one, and then they finally realized that there are far more than one. And so that with each new gene that's introduced into this mix, you have to do more back crosses to get the number of trees so that some of them have the full combination of all those genes. And this has proved to be a huge stumbling block for them. And just recently they kind of pulled back on that and have gone to, because of the advancement in genetic research, now what they're trying to do is do controlled crosses. They've done the complete genome on one of their favorite American chestnut trees and on two of their favorite Chinese trees. And then they're doing controlled crosses between those trees of known genetics. And then when they test them and find ones that have the genetic resistance to blight, then they can look at the genome, which has already been established, and they can determine genetic markers for those resistance, what they call alleles, which are basically mutations that create that resistance. So if they can get to that point, then what they should be able to do is they should be able to plant out 100,000 seedlings, do a genetic test, find out, okay, this subgroup here has what we're looking for, and just plant those. And so that's kind of their new tack in the breeding program that they're in. In the meantime, though, the University of Syracuse Bob Maynard, probably 30 years ago, started trying to actually make a GMO chestnut, where he wanted to just basically inject resistance genes into single cells, embryonic cells of American chestnut, and give them blight resistance. And then have a tree that was basically 100% American, but had this one gene in there. And there were huge things to overcome with this, and one was that nobody had been able to actually bring one cell back to a complete chestnut tree. And that ended up taking years and years and years to achieve. And I'm not sure how well they've actually really done with it. But in the meantime, they did. They came up with a way. They found a gene that works. It's from wheat, and with this, what it does, they insert this wheat gene that encodes an enzyme, which is oxalate oxidase, that degrades oxalic acid, which is the toxin that the blight actually kills the tree with. And they finally successfully incorporated that into a single cell and brought it back to a tree. And then they had problems with that persisting. And so they've used some other genetic enhancers that will make sure that becomes kind of a dominant gene. And they went, since it is a GMO, it had to be EPA registered and all of that stuff, and they went through this horrific ordeal trying to get this thing okayed, finally got it okayed. And then just recently, they found out that somebody had mixed up some batches, and the one that they got okayed isn't the actual one that had what they were looking for. So that's where that's at, is that they're back to kind of starting over on that a little bit.
So, I don't know if you know this or not, so the wheat, the gene from the wheat, was this a gene that was already existing in wheat? Was it already there, or was that from a modification made to wheat?
No, it was already existing in wheat, as far as I know.
That's cool.
Yeah. So that's kind of where that program's at. It's coming along. But as I said before, my problem with that is especially if you're as old as I am, you can see the forests are disappearing. And so that habitat to put these things back in isn't going to be there. If you can project your mind out there, look at it this way, 200 years ago when the settlers walked in here, it was a complete sea of trees. There was nothing but woods in here, with a few isolated prairies that the Indians would burn periodically. Look at it now. That's 200 years. The population, if anything, it's accelerating, and development's accelerating, and so I don't foresee there being enough woods out there. And if you don't believe that, next time corn goes up to $6, drive down to Ashland and watch them doze off these forests down there and replant them up in soybeans and corn, because it's kind of ironic, but the advancements in agriculture led to these huge yields, and it allowed woods to come back because all of these properties became non-economically viable, kind of starting at the East Coast, working its way back into the Corn Belt, and then it kind of stalled out there, and then population kind of caught up to it, and the price of corn and soy started to go up, and now those woods are getting dozed back off again. So the woods kind of got a reprieve there, but it's not going to last forever. And it's sad. I don't even like to look at it that way, but I think that's unless we do something about our population, you've got to be a realist. And I think if you want to preserve a species, you have to make man kind of help it to fit into man's world, and so that's kind of what we're trying to do with the chestnuts. Now, on the scene of chestnuts in general, and I'm just gonna kind of, as long as I'm talking about what's happening out there, for the longest time, we kind of felt pretty alone. I think Greg Miller and I had a couple other people that grew chestnuts in the United States. There were so few of us. And all of us, I think, believed that if we could ever prove that you could make money growing chestnuts, that people would dedicate thousands of acres to planting chestnut trees, which would save the species. And that is actually happening. And I think the number of trees that are being planted out there is just almost unbelievable. We sold enough seed, I think, in the last 2 years to replant every chestnut that existed in the United States, almost on a yearly basis now. And that's exciting. It's a little bit scary since we sell chestnuts for consumption. I'm a little bit worried about, what that's going to lead to. But there's quite a bit of room for growth in the short term. And then we're going to have to come up with some products that use chestnuts. And I belong to Route 9 Co-op, and that's a consortium of about 5 or 6 growers that kind of work together. And we sell a lot of our chestnut crop through them. And we've been working on making chestnut flour. I'm just going to pass this around, but we made thousands of pounds of it this year. And we're trying to get established in that so that once all these chestnuts start coming in from all these plantings, that there's something to do with them all. Hopefully flour will be part of it. Now in the commercial chestnut world, that's part of what's going on. There's some fairly huge plantings going in. There's one that's they planted 150,000 trees down in Kentucky in one planting. And that one is actually combined effort. I think who all is involved in that. We've got an outfit called Propagate. Has anybody heard of them? Yeah. They have combined effort with Cargill and then an individual landowner named Kevin Hill. And they planted, it depends who you talk to, I've heard 150,000 trees and also 180,000 trees on Hill's property in Kentucky. And so that should be pretty interesting. And I'm not sure, we don't have equipment right now to harvest these things, so we're doing it all by hand. I'm kind of wondering how this is all going to pan out. But that's one of the big plantings and kind of just an example of what's going on up there. Big money's got involved in some of this, so it's probably got a future. And if Cargill's involved in it, I would imagine, they're seeing a big future out there. And then another thing on that front is that there have been grants available for planting trees for carbon sequestration that have encouraged a lot of people to plant chestnuts because they'll get the money from carbon sequestration plus eventually get a crop. And so that's provided an avenue for a lot of people to get subsidized doing it.
Do you sell chestnuts to livestock growers?
For what?
To livestock growers?
A little bit. Like this year, for instance, we had a lot of small nuts, and the market for the really small chestnuts is not very good. And we did provide some to Joe Wright, a local pig farmer. And pigs, chickens, and lambs eat them. And then we used to, at the end of the season on our farm, we had all of this fenced in with deer fence, and Joe would bring in his sheep in there and glean the orchard and pick up everything that, when he got to the point where my pickers couldn't make any money, he'd bring in the sheep, and the sheep would go ahead and finish the rest of it off. But unfortunately, the Food Safety Act kind of put the kibosh on that, because they wrote up a law that it's illegal to have any livestock in a chestnut orchard. within 100 days of harvest?
Think.
It's either 100, 120 days of harvest, and the worst thing is they didn't say if it's before harvest or after. And the guy we had up here just read it by the law, so that it was before or after. So this is the kind of problem you get into with some of the stuff that really stymies creativity, and you know, I'm not a big advocate of that, but you got to somewhere there seems to be, with governance and common sense, it's an eternal battle, and the two are just separated.
Well, I think you have to get, everything's put out with regulation, so if whoever writes the regulation doesn't click, that you've got to be specific.
Yeah.
So you've got to get in there, and really, if it's open for comment, that's where sometimes we get lazy, we don't get our comments in there. That's on us.
Sometimes it's that way, but I've seen where people went in with good comments that completely ignored.
Yeah.
They've already made up their mind, and that. So yeah, you're right. People have to have more. There has to be a better interface between the people that are affected and the people that are actually writing these things. But at any rate, that's I think ultimately a good thing. I mean, they're getting a lot of chestnuts planted out there all over the place. Some are going to do well, and some are going to probably crash and burn. But it'll get the thing started. And then another thing on the horizon. There's good and bad on the horizon here. One of the good things is that I was telling you how University of Syracuse was working on this plant cloning. There was a guy from a place called Nutty Z's, which is a little guy that, have you met him, Brian, or Jeff?
Zarnowski or something like that?
Zarnowski, yeah. He went up there to the university, and they kind of taught him how to do this, and he just went off on his own and started working on it, and got some colossal, which is probably the most planted cultivar into tissue culture. And he had some problems with it, and that he got them to grow, and he got them to grow roots and everything else, and then they didn't really want to grow a straight trunk out of tissue culture. And then I think he almost gave up. Then he found out if he mowed those off right at the ground, then they would send up a trunk. And so he had some success, but I think he kind of gave up on it, or just did it himself. He wasn't economically viable, let's put it that way. But just recently, a guy, Craig Clark, who had West Coast chestnut. He'd been working on this for 5 or 6 years, and he's actually figured out how to do it. And so he has got to the point where he actually has tissue culture trees for sale. And this is a pretty big step forward, because I know in our cases we've been breeding chestnuts for about 30 years. And we've come up with some fantastic chestnut trees that are probably have 3 times the production of a normal chestnut and twice as good a nut as a normal chestnut. Some of them have various different attributes, like we have some that we've selected that retain their burr pretty much until after the nuts have fallen, so that you could get in there with some kind of a harvester and harvest without having to deal with these burrs that go around, which is kind of gums everything up with a pecan harvester or any of the commonly used equipment. And if this actually works out, and it does seem to be working out, we can produce thousands of clones of some of our very best trees, which would help some people get started. And I'm really optimistic about that, although I'm a big proponent of keeping these breeding programs going, because as I've probably said before, each one of these cultivars is basically a genetic dead end. If that's all you're growing, there's no improvement after that. So that there is plenty of improvement among the pests and pathogens, though. And they'll hone in on acres and acres of golden delicious apples until they figure out how to overcome them. And so you know, it's very critical to keep these breeding programs going, and that's basically what our land grant colleges are supposed to be doing. That's in their charter, and almost all of them are ignoring. And that's one thing we need to get on them to do what they're supposed to do. Yep.
Has anyone made like cultivar orchards? I know they do that in Papa.
Yeah, they have, and the two notable areas that they do that, well, I should say three. One is Michigan. Michigan got started, Dennis Fulbright was a professor up there at Michigan State. He felt, and partly because he'd been trained this, and I say trained, not educated, that you could only have a successful orchard with cultivars. And so he promoted that up there in Michigan. Now, I will say that in Michigan, it might not have been that bad of a choice because they're so out on the fringe of where you can grow chestnuts that they found one cultivar that did well up there. And so that's just about all they planted, that pollinator. And I'll show you on the slides what they're dealing with up there. But I was at odds with Dennis Fulbright on this for a long, long time because the only people making any money on chestnuts were planting seedlings. And chestnuts are notoriously hard to graft. But colossal actually grafts fairly well, but it's a very mediocre nut too, which is one reason I'm not too much of a promoter of that one. But it has this big, beautiful nut that you almost can't resist buying it if you see it in the store. Anyway, Michigan is one area they do that quite a bit. On the West Coast, they have ideal growing conditions where everything's irrigated. They don't have some of the pest problems we have here and pathogen problems. They've been able to do it out there. But partly it's much easier to graft European genetics and Japanese genetics than it is to do Chinese. And part of that stress problems that we have in the Midwest because we have, it's tough on trees here. But at any rate, there's one grafted Chinese chestnut orchard that's actually just about all grafted out in Missouri. That's pretty nice. It's Chinese, primarily Chinese, and that one Stouffer's own it. And it's a beautiful orchard. Ken Hunt grafted the whole thing. He was at the University of Missouri, and then they had like a downsizing thing there. There's nobody in this room from the University of Missouri, but they got rid of their best guy. I couldn't believe they let this guy go. But anyway, he combined efforts with Stouffer's and planted up this orchard. That's really something. In fact, a lot of the seed, some of the very best seed in the country comes from that orchard because he knew what he was doing and he just had some of the very best cultivars in there, and they cross-bred so that the seed coming out of that is just the best, some of the best genetics around, except for ours.
Were those Chinese grafted on Chinese rootstock, or was it different?
Yes, Chinese on Chinese.
Right.
And they thought they had some other stuff, but it's funny is they had Sleeping Giant in there was one of them. But Ron Revore out at University of Missouri has done the genome on that one, and apparently, believe it or not, that's Chinese. I always suspected that it was because all the hybrids I have pollination problems. And Sleeping Giant, which is supposed to be a super hybrid, never had any. And it always had 3 nuts per birth. Always, no bad ones in there. And that perplexed me until Ron actually did the genetics and found out that, those got mixed up or something. Who knows? And that's rampant out there. It's, I don't know if any of you ever grown anything like blueberries or anything like that, but you'll get stuff is so mixed up out there, it's not even funny. It's a good thing they've got genetic testing. I'm going to go through that's the one other thing that's big on the horizon right now. Oak wilt apparently is really rough on chestnuts. We've had it in our orchard for a long time, particularly our orchard down in Hiram, in Ashland County. And I'll show you some pictures of how it's kind of moved around in there. But it gets into your orchard and just kind of moves around, and you can trench to it mostly spreads, there are beetles that introduce it initially. But once it gets into a tree, it can spread through the root grafts, where those trees have grafted onto the roots of other trees in the orchard. And they readily do that, and they kind of support each other in the orchard that way. But it provides this avenue where this disease can move. It's a fungus that just infects one tree after another.
Would having birds, like chickens or whatever, grazing around your trees help with that issue at all?
That type of thing would help, but as I said before, that's illegal now. So, if you're doing it on a commercial scale, you're gonna have a real problem with food safety people over that. So that tool's been taken out of the toolbox.
I didn't know until you did that.
Oh, don't get burned, I get it.
That's Joe.
Anyone want coffee?
Yeah.
It's still here.
Yeah, really.
Okay, back there? I'm going to just kind of give you a little run through on what we have been doing for the last 30 years. Then I'll talk a little bit about the seed nuts that we're going to have, or the seedlings that we're going to have available in the spring over here, and what they really are. Anyway, this is kind of a photo of one of our plantings down in Ashland County. We've been trying to plant 10 or 12 acres a year down there.
10 or what? I'm sorry.
Oops. Which is, there we go.
10 or 12.
And I'm going to kind of cruise through this stuff, but we've developed, and actually Lynn helped me immensely put this thing together. This is my cup of tea. I couldn't do this by myself, but these are some of the things that you got to consider when you're going to plant these things, and you're going to sink a lot of money into this. So you really, you have to go about it scientifically. And some of the things to consider are like compatibility of surrounding land. I've got one orchard that's right up against an organic farm, and we've got a spray for weevils. And that, if I would have known that, I would never have planted chestnuts there, because it's so tricky to get in there when the wind is just right, so that I don't pollute their planting there. And then you got to worry about it the other way, because people may be spraying dicamba and Roundup and stuff, even from planes. And that drift can get right into your orchard, so you got to be kind of aware of what's going on around you. The length of the growing season is critical and highly variable. In Ohio, I like to use the example of Ashtabula County, where in one county we have the longest and the shortest growing season in the state of Ohio. So it can go from about 100 days growing season to over 200, just depending on where you land. And so you can't just go, if you're going to plant in Ashtabula County, you need to look carefully at that, because in some of those places, chestnuts just won't grow. Then, the amount of sunlight that you're getting, we have a lot of lake effect here, which cuts down on the amount of lumens that we actually get. Local microclimates, amount of rainfall, heat units, extreme winter low temperatures, and that's what I want to dwell a little bit on, because a lot of people just look at the climatic map and say, okay, this is zone 5. It can get down to 20 below zero here. But the thing, you're not planting an annual crop anymore. You're planting something that's going to be there hopefully for 30 years. So you have to go with the minimum. You can't look at that 20 below figure. And that minimum is almost always, no matter where you're at in the United States, it's almost always 20 degrees less than what the zone map calls for. So if you're in zone 5, you may see 40 below at some point. Some of that can be, you can get around it through site selection. That kind of low temperature, air always settles into the lowest spot, so you can avoid a lot of that by being up on a hilltop there. You have to think these things through carefully. And if anybody's really interested in planting an orchard, I'd be happy to share what knowledge I have with them on that, to you can avoid a lot of problems up front.
What's a heat unit?
Pardon me?
What's a heat unit?
A heat unit, it's a measure of how warm it is and how many, it's divided into days, so that they use it a lot for tracking pests, but they also use it in most row crops, like certain varieties of corn have to have minimums of so many heat units. And you can look that up, there are heat unit maps. In fact, I think I've got some here. This is that map I was talking about where, you can see Ashtabula County up here with these different zones all within the same county. You got to be aware of that, because it makes a huge difference in what you can grow. This shows degree days, which is a function of heat units, really. And this is one of the things I want to show you about the guys in Michigan, because I was really at odds with these guys, but they really can't grow Chinese chestnuts very well up there. And I didn't really believe it, but it really is true. But you see, if you look at Michigan compared to Ohio, this is the problem that they've got here, is degree days. And that's one of the reasons why their crop comes on probably 3 weeks later than ours. And I was working with, besides our adversarial relationship, Dennis Fulbright, I got along just fine. And he was going to bring down his harvesting equipment and try it on my place, before he even needed it up in Michigan. That's how much later they are. And this is another, New York State had a nice map here with the amount of frost-free days. And this shows you, you would think would be more similar, but depending on where you're at, there are big patches in here that have less than 103 days, and there's big patches that have more than 203 days. And so if you were getting into chestnuts, you want to be where there's 203 days. You want to, ultimately production is based on how much photosynthesis that those leaves can can accomplish. And so, if you're dealing with these short seasons, you'll never get the production that you would if you were somewhere else. And since you do put quite a bit of money in this, you have to look at it like profit-making venture. And once you select the site, there's some things that you can do things about, and you almost have to increase your chances of success as much as you can. One is soil drainage, tiling where it's necessary. These chestnuts do not like wet feet, and so if you're you can probably plant like a Worcester silt loam, which is an upland soil that they have around here, probably without tiling. But the next one down, Canfield, Ravenna, definitely you'd have to tile if you're looking at a commercial venture. Soil fertility and pH, those are very important. pH you can modify, and soil fertility you can modify, so that those are things you can change in your favor, and you should if you can. Deer fence, and you can see the deer fence running around here. I've probably, I don't know how much money I've spent in deer fence. I've resisted it forever. Initially on my home farm where I planted my first commercial orchard, I went, there were some coon hunters around me that had dogs that had gone bad on chasing deer, and I went and collected them all. Usually I used to kill them, and I just let them loose on my farm. And they would, any deer that came within 1,000 foot of that farm got a 10-mile run out of it, and they learned not to come anywhere near our farm, which was fine while the dogs were still young. As the dogs got older, they just sit there and bark at them, and then I had some other problems where once they ran the deer out, they started concentrating on other animals, including cats. And I got into all kinds of trouble, and got in trouble with the dog pound down here. I would go bail the dogs out, they charged me $100 to get them back. And so I finally went down there to bail the dogs out. The guy told me, he says, Bob, he says, you have been upgraded to the chronic offender list, and you're looking at possible jail time here. And so we kind of got around that, but that was enough of the dog thing. And the old dogs, I got beat up couches, and they all lived out their lives, and got them all buried around the farm. But we tried everything else that you can imagine, but the deer fence actually works. And in one orchard that I've got up in Hiram, which is one of the first ones that I fenced in, I had pretty good production records from that farm. And after we fenced it in, I realized that I was getting a 60% return on my investment in that deer fence per year. And I was talking to somebody else this morning, where could you invest your money and get 60% interest on it? So it's a bitter pill. It's a lot of money to put one of those up, but it pays off.
Hey Bob, on the wet feet, do they need to have all the roots away from a body of water? Or if some of them are in a dry area and some of the roots of the tree are near water,
Yeah.
is that okay? Or
I think it's okay, because that tree, I think it can kind of reprogram those roots. It'll go for the dry ground on its own. And I think the ones that get off into wet conditions, I think will literally stop growing, and it may be from different types of root rot and pathogens, not necessarily oak wilt. But if you're in an area that is really susceptible to that, or have a little area on the farm, I try and avoid them, because that's where oak wilt's likely to get started, because those trees won't be as healthy, and a lot of times those beetles that transfer it will zero in on those trees, and you get it started there, and then it moves out on its own. So in a small planting, I wouldn't worry that much about it.
Well, I heard that people were making a mound of dirt in a low area,
Yeah.
planting the tree in that, but it seems like some of the roots would still get up to the wet area.
Yeah, they will. It makes it so that it's just not an ideal condition, and it's one of those things where you're kind of fighting an uphill battle. But it does work, and you can do it. And like I say, in a smaller planting, I don't think you're going to have as much problem, because the more acres of tree you have out there, the more chance of one of these things coming in and getting that disease started. And once it's started, it's pretty hard to stop. And you can, like I say, you can trench around these trees. We've been doing that down at Route 9 Co-op, where you trench around the infected trees, and then you move out a couple rows and do another trench just to cut any root ties between those trees. And we've had success doing that, but it's a huge proposition, and it messes up your orchard too.
Do you actually dig a trench, or you just take one of those rippers?
We've been digging a trench with a trencher. Yeah, but I think the ripper might work, but I'm afraid with something like that, the roots might fall right back against each other and callus off and start transferring material again. Not sure though. I think it's kind of unproven. We've still got some things to learn about that.
The thing about deer fence is Bob tells me it's about $5 a foot, or has been in the past, so I can afford to maybe do a foot a year or so. I can't afford to put up a deer fence.
Yeah.
We'll take what the deer leave us.
Yeah, and if you're really diligent, but the deer.
They taste good.
Yeah,
It's like
the deer
chestnuts.
tastes good too. Yeah, but you can only eat so many of them.
Can you use tree tubes when they're young to keep them?
Yeah, and Joe's the man to talk to about that right there.
I use them all the time, they're great. Eventually I'll leave the fence though, because it doesn't stop them from eating the nuts off the
Who
ground.
asked that question? Is that you? I'm gonna watch you leave and make sure you don't take these tree tubes.
No.
I have hundreds of
Oh,
them.
these aren't free?
No, they're not. They're your project. Jane made them.
Here's a tiling project that we did. Luckily with GPS, you can put those tiles right down between the rows. If you're careful and you got the right kind of piece of ground. Okay, this is one of our orchards down in Ashland. And this is mostly from drainage problem, not 100%, but most of the time in each one of these rows, we're testing a particular batch of genetics so that each one of these rows, most of the time, is from a single mother tree. And so what we started doing, since grafting didn't work very well, we planted an orchard up here in Hiram. And at the time, I consulted the Northern Nut Growers Association, the Society of Ontario Nut Growers, Ohio Nut Growers, and others. And they provided me with a list of what they thought were the 30 best chestnut trees in North America at the time. And then they went out of their way to help me actually get seed or seedlings from those trees. And so we kind of took this shotgun approach and planted up about 4,424 trees on a fairly small acreage and let them grow out. And some of those trees, let's say from some of the ones from the West Coast, had no blight resistance, and most of them just died the first time the blight went through. A lot of them couldn't handle the cold that we had here. The first time it got down to 24, 25 below, it wiped out a bunch more. And then it got down to where we were selecting based on the plant vigor, disease resistance, and the quality of the nut itself. And then what we've been doing is, that allowed us to do a couple things. One is we discovered which seed sources were actually producing nut trees that did well here in Ohio. So we had that established, so that in the orchards that we started planting down here in Ashland County, we would only plant ones that we had good success with in that initial plant. And then we would plant a row of those, and then the next row we would try one of our most promising seedlings from that orchard up in Hiram. And so we were doing what we call progeny tests, where you're testing the offspring of these mother trees to see which ones actually do the best. And after a while, we've come up with ones that were better than anything that we started with initially, to the point we don't need to plant them so close. In that first planting, we put them on 4 foot apart, and an awful lot of them died on their own, believe me. But by the time we culled that orchard down to about 380 trees, and the pollen cloud up there is really high quality too, because you've eliminated all the junk out there. And it's the best being pollinated by the best. And so we've picked out some really fantastic trees in it, which is one of the reasons I'm so excited about this tissue culture, because we now may have the ability to produce thousands of our very best stuff, and it would be a total game changer for the chestnut industry if we could do that.
So in that picture, all those trees were planted at the same time, so you're seeing big growth on the left-hand side and it dwindles all the way to the right, or is that
no, yeah, that's not what you're seeing. That's 25 acres right there. And what we were doing when we first started, I bought a dairy farm down there from a guy. He still had his cattle, and he was looking for a way to get out of business without losing everything that he had. And it's worked really well with us, because I bought the land. He gave me a little discount on the price of the land. I told him I'm only going to take 7 to 10 acres a year, and I'll give you lease free on that farm for the next 10 years so that you can get out here in one piece. And so it worked out great. And so these ones are the oldest here, and it just, there I think are 4 or 5 different plantings going across this. So there's about a 5-year difference in the age. But some of these holes that are developing in here, some of these were because the progeny of that tree that we thought was so great wasn't very good at all. And you'll see that where you lose a whole row. You might have a few survivors out that just got pollinated that had something that other tree didn't. So you get some of that going on, but some of these areas where you're getting patches develop up in there, some of that's from poor drainage, and some of that is from oak wilt. And in a way, I hate the oak wilt thing, and some of the oak wilt that I got up there may have come in with some seedlings that I bought. because when we first noticed it, it took out almost an entire row of stuff that I got from one nursery. You gotta be a little bit careful when you buy your stuff because of that type of thing. And to this day, I'm not sure if it's oak wilt that we have down here or Phytophthora, because Phytophthora cinnamomi is devastating chestnuts too. But in my book, I don't even care. I don't care what it is, I don't need a name on it. But what I need to know is how to stop it. And in our orchard down there, some trees have been spared. And you'll see where it has killed everything except one or two trees here and there. And so we've been doing controlled crosses on those trees, working with the University of Missouri. And what we're trying to do is basically the same thing University of Syracuse was doing. But we think if we get enough controlled crosses out there and then inoculate them with oak wilt or whatever this pathogen proves to be, the ones that survive, so we've done the entire genome on these, we should be able to develop marker genetics for those resistant genes that we're looking for. And then again, we can plant out maybe 100,000 seedlings and just test them. And just take those ones that have what we're looking for. And this as AI comes on and all of this, it's going to do some great things, and it's going to do some bad things too. But one of the great things that it's going to do, it's going to make it possible for us to make huge advancements in silviculture, where we can just have, we can pick out this, and this that used to take 30 years of growing to determine whether or not we had it. And we'll be able to do that like that. And then all of a sudden, it's a level playing field between breeding corn, which you can get 2 crops off a year, and breeding chestnuts, where it's taken 30 or 40 years to figure out what you've got. Because you could always do 50 generations of corn for every 1 generation of a tree crop. And so tree crops just kept getting behind. Very slow improvement, but now that's all going to change. And it's changing right now, and it's going to change, it's going to accelerate. And then maybe we can actually make this planet a nicer place. I really think that's going to happen.
When you said using AI, you mean against the genetics?
Yeah, I think what we're going to be able to do, once we have that computing ability, we should be able to take whole rows that I've planted here, test my orchard up in Hiram, and then instead of having to do these controlled crosses and waiting to get that out, we should be able to determine what the father of these trees was. And then we wouldn't have to go through that whole step. With that kind of computing ability, we should be able to really take some shortcuts that we haven't been able to so far. At least that's my take on it.
If you're keeping the markers and the genomes for the good stuff, are they also keeping track of the bad stuff so you don't reproduce it and have it down the road where somebody's already forgot about
Yeah,
the bad stuff?
Yeah, so far we haven't really thought that, or I haven't thought that much about that, but you're right, that's something that should be done, that needs to be done.
Bookmark the bad stuff too, so.
Yeah, I'm sure Cargill will not overlook that. Let's see, cultivars or seedlings, I think I already went through that. So far, in Ohio, you need to plant seedlings. There's no question about it so far, but it may change real quick here. And then some of the, whether you should plant the different kinds. Around here, I really think we need hybrids, and I'll tell you why. This has become a world ecology. We have almost every chestnut pest already over here. And some of them from Europe, some are from Japan, some from China. Each one of those trees has developed on its own resistance to that pest that it co-evolved with. And so I would like to use the example in my orchard where I started noticing that the Japanese beetles weren't bothering certain trees. Well, when I really went through the orchard, I found out that all of those had some Japanese genetics in them. Japanese beetles don't even like Japanese chestnut. They evolved over the years to have defenses against them. Now, an American chestnut, Japanese beetle go and eat every single leaf off of it, which is another reason why that program of developing this American chestnut that's all American, it's an obsolete idea now, because that niche is gone already, really, as far as the insect pests and pathogens that we have here. It's not what it was then, and that tree wasn't equipped to handle it, and isn't. But I think I'll pass.
Question.
Yeah.
Have you had problems with resistance to various pests being diluted in your hybrid offspring? Because you said people who are growing American chestnuts were having the same problems with the Chinese resistance genes being diluted.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. You do get that. And you'll have, when you do that cross, most of the time there is some dilution. And in reality, since a lot of these are probably, maybe recessive genes, it's probably that next generation that's going to actually show it. So it's not going to be the F1, it's going to be the F2 that you may get that, get it back full force. This is our Hiram orchard where I was telling you, these started out on 4-foot spacings and rose 20 foot apart. And that's kind of how it got thinned out. But it's a beautiful orchard. I don't know if you just walk it in there, And these are some trees. This is one that I was like, I sometimes have had these brief love affairs with these trees where it looks like it has everything I've been looking for, and then it crashes for some reason. This is one called Hiram, and I think you got graphs of this, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. This is a pretty fantastic tree, except that when we got a new pathogen up here called blossom end rot, it turned out that this tree was fairly susceptible to it, and so it. Now, this blossom end rot, depending on where you're at and how much light the tree gets, most trees seem to be able to fight it if the health of that tree is up enough. And one of the problems we've had with it here in this orchard is that this orchard is still so tight packed because we planted so tight together. And once we did our selections, I didn't really want to cut these trees down because the stuff is so good in there. And I'm just basically taking seed from this orchard. But those pathogens really demonstrate themselves here. So the blossom end rot is terrible in this orchard. In normal spacing, it wouldn't be so bad. And so Hiram may have more of a future than I do.
How long ago was that picture taken? Because that tree is like huge now.
Yeah, you've seen that tree. Yeah, how long ago did we do this?
This for 2018.
2018, and when we did it, Lynn was totally responsible for this. But thank God she did it. They helped me put together this so that I could give talks and just zero in on one part of this and not have to try and come up with something each time. But we were using all kinds of pictures that we had from different time periods. So yeah, this is pretty outdated. Some of these trees are like, they're this big around now. And this is how we grow them out. Well, I sub this out to a couple local greenhouses up here. We'll pick out the seed that we have, keep it refrigerated at about maybe 34 degrees or so over the winter, keep it a little bit moistened down. Then we go ahead and plant them out and put plenty of labels in so that we don't get them messed up. And then we'll grow them out like this, then move them out to a seedling bed. And what we do is we'll put in a lot of organic material like rotted sawdust and things like that, rototill that down, sometimes rip it with a subsoiler, and then we lay down one piece of irrigation tape down the middle and put plastic mulch over the top of that, and then we put them 4 abreast every 4 inches going down that bed. And we'll grow them out like for one summer like that.
Is that what is that the way you're still doing it? All those trees beside the
Yeah,
barn, so they started in greenhouse and then you replanted them?
yeah. And then we come in with Bobcat with a ditch digger on the front. And then we undercut those beds, pick them up and jostle them around a little bit. It's pretty primitive. They make machines for this, but on the farm you use what you got, right? And that's basically at the end of that's 1 year you can get to that point. And that's the ideal place for planting. A lot of places will try and sell you on buying these bigger trees, but you're wasting your time.
Have you tried doing air root pruning?
I haven't specifically, there are probably people in this room that have, I think, but I had people do it independently for me. There was a big nursery out in Missouri that I had grow a bunch of stuff out for me and then graft. And they trademarked that. Do you know what their RPM system? I think they call that, but yeah, it does work.
I have a couple at my house, and I don't get seedlings that look like that most of the time. So, would it be easier to do because you don't have to use a trencher?
I couldn't hear you.
Like I have air pruning beds at my house where I do trees like that, and you'll get roots like that, and you don't have to use a trencher, which
Yeah,
you can have problems with.
that would be a beautiful thing. I think we just kind of got started this way, and I'm kind of a creature of habit. Plus, once we got it down, it was fast and easy, and it's probably not ideal though. Then we'll plant these things out with an auger. I had we try and lay them out in a grid, and then we have all this mapped out with GPS. And we had a guy that had a grant from one of the nut growers that came out, and he helped us develop a system where we can put a GPS locator in a backpack and then walk down through the field. And as we gather data on these trees every year, we're keeping track of something like 30,000 trees, and we can have a pad and actually just speak into it, and it'll show you an aerial view of the tree that you're standing under, so that you're sure that you're at the right spot. Then you enter the data into this thing, and we keep track of production on every one of those trees with that system. And you need to do that because so many of these cultivars are just somebody's best tree out of a planting, maybe 20. And it's such a young industry that those are floating around out there, and a lot of them are not really that good, and they may have some fatal, real flaws to them. I'm hoping we're going to be able to come up with something better. And that's after about a year in the ground. Then that's probably maybe four or 5 years there. And they just keep growing. Somewhere around year 6 or 7, you start to get pretty good crops out of them, where it's really worth, getting down to business. And this is my initial orchard. On our home farm, I planted up about 5 acres of Dunstan chestnuts back in '92, and I wasn't real happy with the outcome. They're not bad, and I don't want to ever get to the point where I'm cutting down the Dunstan chestnut, because it's not a bad tree, but there's better stuff out there by far. And that actually, this planting is what led us to do what we decided to do in Hiram.
I noticed that you had bare tilled field when you planted into it. Do you specifically plant an understory you want, like grass? Because
We do most of the time. We'll plant usually a mixture of clover and some short growing grasses, and that definitely helps out. We've tried other things, and one of the things that's been pretty interesting is we're working with Savannah Institute, and they came out and picked out places on our different plantings that have the same soil type. And they've been able to demonstrate statistically the improvements in the soil from running this system. The one nice thing about the chestnuts is your soil actually keeps getting better and better. It stops eroding away. When we go into these cornfields where we're planting and soybean fields, it's hard to drive a shovel in. And if you go into my older orchards, you can take that shovel, the same shovel, and just push it down on the ground with your foot with no problem at all. And the organics are increasing. And one of the nice things is, carbon pollution is, it's a real thing. And it's not just that canopy up there that's sequestering carbon, or just the root system. It's increasing in the soil too. Millions and millions of tons of soil increasing 1% or 2% in carbon content is, it's huge. Maybe bigger than the tree itself. So I'm really optimistic about that for the future of the planet. And whether you believe in climatic change or not, carbon pollution is easily demonstrable. If you just go back and test ocean pH, which is almost totally affected by carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, there's no question. And I don't know why they don't concentrate on that instead of something as easy to work against, as climate. But what am I to say?
So the Savannah Institute, do you have copies of some of their, I would love to have that.
Yeah, I'm not really supposed to, they're going to do a paper on it, and they're going to get it published, so, yeah. But, yeah, you didn't hear this from me.
Coming soon?
Yeah, it's coming soon. I think it's going to be at the next NNGA meeting, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Don't forget me.
I won't. This is probably a little further along the Hiram Orchard. This is how we started out. We were keeping track of the production of the trees.
You and I did a presentation, like, we put one together like in 2000, maybe 12 or 13, and then, so some of these pictures are possibly from that original that we pulled back in, and then we updated and did a lot more in 18.
I'm sure this one is, because, we stopped doing this as soon as we got the GPS thing going. But this is how we first got started, is we'd come in and just score it right on the trunk. And so white, the nuts would pass through a 1/8 inch round hole. Blue, the nuts would not pass through. And then the width of the stripe is related to yield. So if that tree had a huge yield on it that year, that stripe was wide. And the nice thing about that is that when it came time to remove trees, since we got thousands and thousands of trees we had to get rid of, you could look at any two trees and say, no, that's the best one there. Occasionally you would get into a situation where they had the same marks, which I always hated. But at that point, then you'd have to just look at tree vigor or some other characteristic that you liked. And I'm sure we eliminated some good stuff, but.
So you got white and blue on that same tree?
Yeah, that tree.
Different years.
Yeah, different years. Those are 3 years of production there. 2 years it had probably medium-sized nuts, and 1 year it had a little bit smaller crop of large-sized nuts, which is fairly common for what they do. And it's funny, in the beginning, everyone was telling us, oh, they have to be large-sized nuts. There's no market for the medium-sized or small-sized. And once the internet got going and we started selling online, we found there was, it's a very ethnic market, but the Chinese people that are used to a medium-sized nut, that's all they want. They'll pay more for that than they will for large ones. So it wasn't at all what we thought it was. And then the sad thing is we cut down a lot of really good trees that had medium-sized nuts on them, and wouldn't do that now. Although I will say that the big ones are so much easier to pick by hands that it's probably okay what we did. Yeah, that's more what we like to see. And these are some chestnut pests. We got to get back on this one because we've got some new ones. And this one, at the time when this thing showed up, we were the only people that knew what it was, and we didn't have any picture of it, and had never actually seen the pest itself. And that is not the leaf miner that we've got a problem with. It's the one we have is like the little green fly. It looks completely different. Gypsy moth, there's one right under the finger there, that's a bad one. They lay their egg cases right on the tree. Luckily, they're real easy to get rid of, because you can just go through, if you're doing pruning, that kind of thing, just take your finger and rub that egg case right off the tree, and once they get on the ground, they're done. And you can keep it pretty low that way. This is one that came in since I've been growing. Oriental chestnut gall wasp got started here. They brought it in to Byron, Georgia, by mistake. It's some grafting material. And it took off down there. It was spreading about 30 miles a year, but we had an isolated population of them kept going up here in Broadview Heights. And the worst thing about that was they imported some natural enemies of this from Japan. And I think, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think this blossom end rot came with them because they brought birds over that they thought had the natural enemies harboring in them. And then we had a type of blossom end rot up here until that time, but once these things got up here, we had a whole different type of blossom end rot. And I think it came with this stuff.
What time of year do those attack the tree?
It's in June. I think in June's when they really get going. They'll, well, I should say they affect it then, but what they do is they'll come out, they're all females, and they all lay eggs. And they'll go, once they actually emerge, which is in like late July, they'll come around and lay eggs in all of the buds, or as many as they can get at. And then as that thing grows out, they kind of grow out with it. And they make this, they actually secrete some plant hormones which make this gall. And then they feed on the inside of that gall. And like late July, they'll come out and lay their eggs again. And some trees are terribly affected by it, and others not so much. And so that became, as we've been doing this breeding program, it's like a moving target. You go along, you think you've got some pretty good trees, and then all of a sudden you find out, oh, your best tier of trees are 80% of them are terribly affected by gall wasp, and then you've got to go back and almost start over again and again and again. It's not for the weak of heart, I'll tell you that. Then nemesis of the industry is the chestnut weevil, which is a really tough pest to handle, but you can spray for it. And you can also heat treat. If you're far enough north, you can get the chestnuts when they first fall, heat them up to about 122 degrees for about 15 minutes, and it'll kill them before they even hatch. And but it's a tough way of doing it, and it's kind of expensive. And you can spray, and there's some sprays actually labeled now that aren't terribly tough on the environment. And that's a new one too, a relatively new Asian oak weevil. Gets up here, they eat the leaves. They're really rough on them. They love chestnuts. Japanese beetle, I talked about that before. Not too bad on Japanese chestnut, but they'll completely defoliate American. Potato leaf hopper, that's an American pest, devastating on Chinese chestnut, but almost no effect on American. And so that's another, we like to have some American genetics in these things, because one of these days we're going to get it all in one, where we get all of this stuff together. Cicadas, and if you're in an area that has cicadas, every 17 years you're going to lose your crop. And they're just terrible on these chestnut trees. But down at Route 9 Co-op, where most of the Ohio chestnuts are grown outside of ours, this is a real problem down there. And deer, they just kind of browse stuff off, and they'll break the trees with their antlers. That's another reason it's tough to grow grafts around here, because they'll destroy the graft and they'll come back up from the roots unless you got deer fence.
That's just speed beef. That's just speed beef.
Yeah. These are some of the diseases, something we call sour sap disease, which I think is related to climate, where the tree doesn't really harden off before you get that first freeze, and the sap and sugars that get down into the root system kind of ferment. It doesn't necessarily kill the roots, but when that stuff starts coming up, you'll get necrotic spots on the bark, and it can kill the tree, or at least really set it back. But if you cut that thing right off the ground, a lot of times it'll come right back up.
Does that mean it just mainly affects like trees from southern areas?
I would say which one, the sour sap?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think more in the north. Yeah. Phytophthora has been here for a long time, but I think it's a foreign pest. The one that's worse on chestnut is cinnamomi. There are various different kinds of it. It's a slime mold. It's got its own animal kingdom now, I think, on its own. I thought it was just a regular mold, but it has a mobile gametophyte, so in one phase of its life, it can swim around in the soil and go find its next victim. And it hones in on alcohol that can be produced by the sour sap syndrome, which is another reason not to plant that tree in the poor ground, because if that tree is stressed and starts emitting any of this stuff, it'll draw Phytophthora if it's around anywhere. And way before chestnut blight came in, this is just a footnote, all the chestnuts were dying in the south, and they were dying from Phytophthora, not from chestnut blight. And that was back in the 1800s, and that was probably from stuff that was brought in from Asia or Europe or someplace. Chestnut blight, everybody knows about, I think, or has heard about. Blossom end rot is that newer one. And oak wilt needs to be listed with this thing now, too. That's kind of what sour sap disease looks like, is that sap that comes up that's kind of toxic. It starts killing the bark off. And that's where I just kind of cut in so that you can kind of see what it looks like. Phytophthora, you'll get like a blackening of the trunk down below, and then you'll see these lines coming up through the wood, and that's a pretty good indicator that you got that. There's a lot of Phytophthora up in Michigan, and I think it spreads through that sandy soil better than it does through some of our soil. And that's what chestnut blight looks like in the sporing bodies. They're kind of orange, and that one's easy to pick out. I think I talked enough about blossom end rot.
Which one of those diseases would cause black stuff to ooze out of a crack?
Probably Phytophthora. Okay. And these environmental factors like, we didn't have too many really good pictures of frost damage, but that one there is frost damage, and this is one that you can avoid through site selection quite a bit. You don't want to be down in these low in frost pockets and that kind of thing. And that whole thing about microclimate is, it's hard to, there's so many variables involved, it's kind of hard to get on top of it. And you'll find, even if you talk to specialists, there are very few people that really seem to have a understanding. I remember when I was kind of getting into that, I would visit some of the successful apple farms around here and ask them about it, because I figured they must have selected that site based on that. No, not at all. They just happened onto that site. The reason they're still there is because that site was actually a good site. But one of the things you can do, my cheap, quick and dirty trick is get in the car with a good car thermometer, and on a winter day when you get a Canadian high parked over us where it really does drop down to 30 below in these low spots, just drive around that car and find out where are those areas you want to avoid, and where are the areas that are 15 degrees warmer on those, it's really cold. And most of the time that translates into frost protection. as well, but there are other ways you can get frost-sensitive plants. What I do sometimes, I'll look at a frost-sensitive plant like sumac, and when you have had one of these episodes where you get this frost out at the end of May or whatever, drive around and see where the sumac got nailed, you know, and where it didn't. And, you know, I can't stress enough, if you're going to get into this in a serious way, you want to minimize those problems. And so many people, they have a farm, they want to plant that farm because they've got it, and I don't blame them. But if you're in it to make money, you might better scrap that one and go buy someplace where you've got some other advantages going for you. You know, you pick the best site that you can. I learned that the hard way with blueberries. I had blueberries on my farm up here in Manaway. Beautiful soil. It's Bogart silt loam. Had high organics. It was on an old dairy farm that just retired. And those berries grew like weeds on that stuff. But they would get frosted again and again. I would go down, I went and bought a bunch of barrels, I'd fill them up with wood chips, let them just smoke that area in all night. Sometimes I was down there for 20 days in one spring trying to save them. And, you know, all night doing that. And we still made money on blueberries, believe it or not. But I always tell people, can you imagine what I would have made if I would have picked the best spot in the county to do it? You know, every year I lost, you know, half of my crop. And that's, you know, if I could go back, you know, I would never plant them there. And then, but those are, you know, some of those mistakes like that, there's no going back from them. You know, the worst thing is when they kind of hold on. It'd be better, you know, God was merciful, they just all died, you know. Yeah, you want to keep space in the orchard. I've learned that kind of hard way. It's best to cut down, get your chainsaw out, cut down a lot of trees. What I found up in this area is you don't really want these trees growing together. It's better to have them isolated, and you really don't lose production because you don't get as much blossom end rot and stuff, which can take out a third of your crop just on quality issues. You're better off to have them further apart where that tree has better plant health just because it's doing more photosynthesis and getting more low angle light. Because if you plant them too close, you get what I call a flat top orchard, and that it just has photosynthesis going on up the top. The trees have all grown together, and it's just like a field, but up 30 foot off the ground. Here, because we don't get that much light, you know, we're in the area, well, they built the Ravenna Arsenal here because of that it's hard to find so many cloudy days. But up here, you need a little of that low angle light being able to get down into the tree. And so you need a little bit more spacing. And I really believe it pays off. And I just as a little example or proof of that, my son runs our orchard down there in Ashland County. He called me up and said, I think I found some trees that have resistance to blossom end rot. And I was, of course, excited to hear that. Some do, but not complete resistance, believe me. And he said, yeah, they're Hiram seedlings. And I don't know, it can't be. It's Hiram, you know, hasn't, unless they got pollinated by something. And I said, well, what row are they? And he told me. And then I said, well, go, there's another row of them, about 8 rows up. Go check that one out. So he went up that one and had it. And what it was he picked out a row that was the end of a planting. And we had taken a year off, so the trees in the next planting were 2 years younger, and they weren't competing. Those trees were getting a whole lot more sunlight, and they had better health and were able to fight this thing off, where their neighbor of the same variety that was back in the planting where they weren't getting so much sunlight was having a heck of a time with it. So spacing is super important.
So what do you recommend for spacing?
Well, depends what you're going to do or what you're after. But right now, in this part of the country, we kind of have to plant seedlings. So what I recommend is putting them on a 15 by 20 and then start removing them. Let them go for the first 7 or 8 years until they start production. Keep track of production on these things like we do, even if you just use the paint. Then about year 10, cut half of them out. And just keep thinning them out. And it's hard for people to do that. It was hard for me to do that. But the thing is, you're doing a couple great things. One is you're eliminating junk. And a lot of these trees that you cut out will have flaws. You're getting rid of the junk out of the orchard. And then secondly, you're saving ones that have much more production than the average ones. At the end of one of my orchards, I usually thin out at least 90%. But what I've got at the end is the upper 10 percentile on the best producers and best nut quality. And so I've got like a super orchard out of this, just because I wasn't afraid of the chainsaw. And that's a key to success with that system. Now, if you're planting cultivated varieties where you know what you're getting, then I would say you could plant them further apart. Even there, though, I think I plant them closer together because land is so expensive now. You might be looking at 15 grand an acre. You're better off filling that thing and cutting the trees out later because the trees aren't that expensive. The trees are cheap, but if you get, let's say 50 pounds off of one of those trees before you cut it down, 50 pounds of chestnuts is 50 times 5, $250. And that helps, pay off that little piece of land that they're sitting on.
What kind of spacing are you looking for after like 20, 25 years?
25 years, I think you should probably be down to, I would say, maybe 15 trees per acre.
15 trees per acre.
Yeah, so 15 or 43,500, whatever it is, divided by 15. You figure out the number of square feet.
And then leave it that way, or eventually you'd have to even thin it out further?
I think, in some cases, you have to thin it out further. Part of that depends on the trees because the genetics are so different. Like a Chinese tree doesn't really get too huge, although I've seen some with a 65-foot crown. So you can imagine a tree like that, you could only have maybe 10 on an acre. And I've got one like that tree of the north. It might take up a quarter of an acre before it's over. But it depends. Hopefully, I think after a couple more generations, they'll get more consistent, in the size and that type of thing. And really, for an orchard, you don't want one of these great big 90-foot tall trees. They're too hard to spray and too much drift.
But you always want to have a gap. You don't want the canopy closed.
No, you don't. Nope. No. Anybody interested in post-harvest storage and all that stuff? Okay. Yeah, these are some other difficulties. One of the biggest ones is just getting these things picked. Nobody wants to work. And the worst thing is, we pay good money for this. I mean, I've had 12-year-old kids knock down $200 in a day with no problem. And
Closer to the ground, though.
yeah, they are closer to the ground. Yeah, us old timers out there with a nut wizard. It's kind of at a slow pace, but yeah. But it's our job as old timers to round up the young ones to go pick them. But luckily for us, one of our saving graces were in all of our orchards were pretty close to the Amish community, and this fits really well with their perspective on life. And they get out of school usually around the age of 13, and it's tough for them to find a good job, particularly the girls, until they're maybe 16, 17. But this is something they can do, and their parents delight in having them go do this type of thing. Once you have to kind of establish trust with the community so that they actually trust that you're going to take care of them, But they've been our saving grace. They'll get out there and nice thing about the Amish, if you bring them out to the orchard, they expect to be out there all day long. And they'll bring a poncho and they'll bring food and water. And where you're typical, the rest of the population, if it starts to rain, if they come in their own car and it starts to rain, they're out of here. If it gets above 80 degrees, they're out of here. If they've got enough to buy their next hit of crack, they're out of here. And so it's like, you know, thank God for the Amish, that's all I can say. But someday, some of these big guys are probably going to come up with machines here. But I love the situation we got now because, you know, it's a way for young people to make money. They can go out and do this kind of thing. And we've had people bail out their home. Back in '08, down here in Ashland, we had a church group come in and pick, and one of the kids asked if he could bring his folks in. And I said, yeah, the more the merrier. And he brought in everybody, Grandpa and Uncle Joe and babies and everybody else, and between the bunch of them, they made several $1,000s, and hopefully it got them out of the predicament that they were in, because they weren't worried about losing their house. But, you know, in the old days, there were plenty of opportunities for whole families to work together like that. And now there's not too many. And I almost question, is it really a good thing to have these great big machines that harvest all this stuff? I mean, people, they need something to do. You know, you don't have much of a sense of self-worth, and you can see that. I mean, you know.
Sometimes like big corporate offices, like they'll try and do things for their workers. You could see if you could get one of them to come through and pick up chestnuts.
I would love it. That's a darn good idea.
What percentage is pick your own? I know Route 9 has a lot of people.
Yeah.
I've been there and they do real good with pick your own.
Yeah, we do as well. We actually opened up another orchard for that. We were just doing the home orchard, but this last year we did one of our small orchards up in Hiram that way. And I think if you look at the history of the apple business, there used to be wholesale apple growers here in Ohio, plenty of them. And once the West Coast guys got going where they, you know, one grower grows as much as the entire state of Ohio, the price of apples went down to the point where you couldn't do wholesale apples and make a living in Ohio. But the smart guys started pick your own. And they found that there was people who wanted to come out and do something outside. And so they would come out to these apple orchards, and then they'd have a shop there and sell all kinds of stuff. And those have been successful apple growers. And it's going to be the same way with chestnuts. People do want to do this. They want to come out and pick chestnuts. And so I think there's always going to be a market, just like there is for apples on a local scale. And I'm thankful for that. You know, if this thing really, if cargo gets it away and they plant up, you know, thousands and thousands of acres, it's a fairly small market. Right now, it's a niche market. And I don't know if these guys are taking that into account with these acres they're putting in. But that is one of the reasons we go into this chestnut flower thing, because there's going to be a lot of nuts on the market here pretty quick. But I think
that pick your own is the...
Yeah, the pick your own is the solution.
Are there issues
The
with
ethnicity, though, is, you know, it's the grandparents, and then the parents, and they're dragging their kids and their grandkids, and it's,
Yeah.
you know, they want the younger ones to experience all that.
Yeah, Ron's come out and helped us out on the farm in the crunch of the pick your own thing. And he got that going on, plus we're selling chestnuts out of the barn. It gets pretty crazy up there. But it's fun though, and they have a great time. I mean, I think it's a beautiful time of year to get out to, and it has a lot of things going for it.
Other thing that, another difficulty is the burrs and picking them up, getting, you know, because they're sharp, you
Yeah.
can't do it without gloves.
Yeah, I put on the website, bring your own gloves.
I was just gonna ask, is it different insurance-wise if you have pick your own versus just picking for the, you know, your company? Or they leave them, or is it the same?
It depends. On our farm, we have like $1 million blanket liability clause in our insurance. But I will say Ohio has really forward-thinking laws on that. For agro-tourism, which you could call that. I don't know if the ones picking in their own, for you is different. But the ones that are coming out to pick in your orchard, they really don't have any legal recourse to go after you for that.
Do you have to sign something?
Not unless you had something dangerous out there that they get into. Yeah, if you show some real negligence there. If they climb up a tree on their own and fall out of it, that's on them, at least in Ohio. And one nice thing about Pick Your Own, which I'm going to hit before I forget to hit it, is that you don't need storage on that. We spend like, a couple $100,000 on chestnut storage and sorting and all this other stuff that we do. With a Pick Your Own, you don't need any of that. They come out and pick their own, and the amazing thing about it, they don't have to make $200 a day. So for them, if there's not that many chestnuts out there and they spend a whole, half a day getting a bucket full, they're okay with that. That's not what they didn't come for production picking. They came out to have a good time out in the country. So all of a sudden, they really started gleaning these fields to the point where, chipmunks would have to have provisions to cross the orchard when it's over. They do a good job, and they also will take stuff that you couldn't sell. Like if I'm selling to a re-wholesaler, those nuts have to be perfect. But a lot of times I will look at what comes out in the buckets that they're bringing out, and they'll have splits in there that we would just throw away or feed to the pigs or whatever. But they'll pay for them, and it ups your profit margin. You don't have to pay for any pickers either,
Something else that's possible, and I never thought till this last year, and Bob got a chestnut peeler.
Yeah.
So that's something else maybe, if somebody wants to pay extra, run their nuts, come and buy their nuts or pick their own nuts and then run them through a peeler so they don't have to do that later.
Yeah, we had those folks were Chinese, weren't they? Yeah, I think in China they do that a lot. And so if you'll buy a little bag of chestnuts, they'll run them through a peeler right there. The peeler's a little rough on them. I mean, I'm always surprised, but it does peel them, and then they take them and make whatever they make. And from those areas of the world, like parts of China, Korea, Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia, those folks have all kinds of recipes for using chestnuts. They don't just roast chestnuts; they do other things with them. And so that peeling and form, they like that. Breeding traits, there's all kinds of breeding traits. Vigor is one. A lot of these have not been bred for historically, but I think they should be in some cases. But vigor's a big one. You want that tree to grow up big and produce a bunch of nuts fast. Disease resistance, of course. Tree form. I've noticed that in some trees, like in a big wind, if they have branches that kind of just stick out sideways, those things will just wiggle around. You don't lose too many nuts off, but if they're straight up, they whip, and the burrs fall off of them. So form is important. Also, the crotch angle on some of these branches are really susceptible to breaking if they're at a certain angle. Then, of course, yield and nut quality. And one that I've taken some interest in is allelopathy, which these trees, similar to black walnut, produce toxins, their own herbicide. And it's nice because this is an example right here. That was not sprayed with anything. That tree is killing those weeds right there. And you get some of these crosses that have a double dose of this stuff. And they really, I've had a couple of them that eliminate the competition down to the point where there's pretty much just moss growing there. And I'm not sure how good that is long term for the soil as far as building up organics or anything like that, but it sure makes harvesting nice. Then harvesting the employees, manual labor, and machines that they don't make that you got to make yourself. But pick your own, like I say, is the answer for the small grower. Again, if you want to be in the pick your own market, though, it is extremely ethnic, and the only people that do that are people that come from areas of the world where chestnut was the base crop. It was the corn where they came from, and that includes places like Italy and
Croatia,
Bosnia,
Turkey,
even Estonia.
and then Asians,
Yeah.
all the Asian countries over there,
And
France.
Yeah, so you want to check out where you plant these. I've told people I'd rather have 10 acres next to Little Italy than I would have 100 acres in the middle of Appalachia somewhere. Because they pick them all for me. I wouldn't need any refrigeration or anything. I could charge big bucks for them, and they pick everyone. And then different ways of selling them. You can do the pick your own, buy from the farm, which is, people really like to do that. They really like to come out of the farm, and any other thing that you have there that just looks pretty, flower gardens, whatever. It's a big draw for them if you let them walk through an orchard. All those things help you in those sales. Then co-ops, we were founding members of Route 9 Co-op down in Carrollton. And that's a wonderful thing too, because as I say, the infrastructure is fairly expensive. If 5 of you can get together and just do it once, you're so much better off. And if there's a co-op near you, that changes the whole picture too, because with Route 9 Co-op there, you don't need to buy that stuff. You can just take your chestnut crop down to them, and they'll sell it. They'll take maybe $1 a pound or something like that, but it's well worth it for the small grower. Reed wholesalers, you can, if you can get somebody you can trust. There's big markets like in New York City and Chicago and places like that. If you connect with the right person there, they may have a handle on the Asian market where you wouldn't, and they can sell those for you. You got to make it worth their while, but you'd be surprised if you find an honest one. You always want to get your money up front. I wouldn't sell it to one of these guys unless that money is in my bank account. But I have some good relationships going with some of those guys. And then stores, I worked for years to get into Heinz up here, and they wouldn't trust me. They had bad experience with chestnuts with weevils. And then one day a guy came out to the farm, and he was an old produce guy from way back. He was in his 80s. And he said, "Why don't you sell these to Heinz?" I said, "Well, they don't trust me." And he says, "If I sell them to them, will you give me 50 cents a pound?" And I said, "Yeah." Walked right in the next day, I got an order for 2,000 pounds from them. And you got to know people. But honestly, over the years, it's a hassle. It really is. You get that loaded up. They want you to deliver it, and they may change when they want it or pull back on an order that they've had sitting in your cooler for weeks. And we've had some problems with them. So I don't, stores unless you have to, I wouldn't do it. I'd be cautious about that. These are our pick your own customers for some of them. You can see it's quite a varied group, but they love coming out there. They have a good time. And it's just, honestly, just to provide a place that they can come do that with their family is just a wonderful thing.
They want to try and teach their kids, grandkids and stuff, where they came from and what happened back in the old country. And it's neat meeting these people, and they're speaking a different language. It's like you learn some of their culture, and it's a great experience.
Yeah, great folks, and some great stories too. Some of them, I've had ones tell me they wouldn't have survived like after World War II unless they had chestnut seed. Not that they liked them that much, but they came out to get more anyway. Yeah, this is some of our crop. This one year, back in the beginning when we had one of our first really big crops, we just couldn't sell them. And internet wasn't a big thing then, but somebody called me up from New York City, and they said, "I heard you had some chestnuts." I said, "Yeah, I've got a bunch of them." I said, "Well, how many have you got?" I said, "Well, I've got about 5,000 pounds of them." I was having a hard time selling them. And she said, "Well, would you take $1.50 a pound for them?" I said, "I don't know. I really can't." And she finally came up to, I think it was $1.80 or something that I could live with, you know what I mean? And this was a long time ago. And she said, "Well, don't sell any." She says, "I'm catching the next flight." So she would get on this, red-eye, late-at-night flight, fly into Pittsburgh, rent the biggest U-Haul truck that she could get. She did this for years. And come out, we would load until I told her we couldn't put any more in there because she had no concept. It's a little Korean lady, barely spoke English, and was a chain smoker. And she had no concept that you can't fill that thing to the top with chestnuts and drive it back to New York City. It's not safe. Then they would be squatting down to the ground. I want to put more on it. But she was a great customer. But anyway, we're loading up her truck right there. This is my old cooler. I start off with a second-hand cooler we put up. And this is selling in an outdoor market. I don't suggest doing this unless it's an ethnic market. I've tried it, but it's fun. You meet a lot of people, but they buy like 1 pound here and 1 pound there. Where typical, one of these Korean families comes in, they might buy 30, 40 pounds. It's not a whole wagon full of them. This is our co-op, Route 9 co-op down in Carrollton. And, some of the advantages, just sharing knowledge, sharing resources, post-harvest treatment and storage right there. They've got what we call a chestnut jacuzzi. If you have chestnuts that might be infected with weevil, we'll heat treat them right there. Got to do 1,000 pounds at a time. Licensing benefits because of the Food Safety Act. There's some problems with trying to do some of the stuff off your farm, especially if you're trying to actually make anything like flour or anything like that. Then we have the value-added products like flour. Like flour. Also, we sell chestnut leaves that they wrap cheese in from down there, and we sell the junk chestnuts for deer bait. And they have loyal following down there. We're going to get those.
Where's this at?
It's down in Carrollton, right on Route 9. And if you Google just Route 9 Chestnut Co-op, it'll come up. And some of the other things we do. My son grows pick-your-own blueberries down there, right next to our chestnuts. It's kind of nice because the people that pick blueberries are likely to pick chestnuts, and it also keeps people occupied. Like some of the Amish folks that come in and pick for us, they have kind of extended seasons. They'll pick blueberries up to the chestnut season and switch over to chestnuts. And then we've tried various other things from some of my nut growing buddies. You really can't consider yourself a northern nut grower unless you've tried a few of these other things. You can't just grow chestnuts. So these, we got some seed from Rutgers, where a lot of our members, this organization's been going for 115 years. And these guys were dedicated to making nut trees a crop in the United States. And they made huge progress on some of these nuts. Some of them don't look like it, but on black walnut, they have black walnut that they selected that produces 40% kernel, where the wild ones are only maybe about 12, is it 12?
10 to 15%.
10 to 15%. So there's been huge, leaps forward, but this stuff takes time. It takes a huge amount of time. Sometimes over 100 years. To develop some of this stuff. And the wonderful thing about the Northern Nut Growers and Society of Ontario Nut Growers is that is the glue that kind of holds this thing together. Those organizations have provided a place where people can pass on their progress to up-and-coming young folks that can carry it on instead of just reinventing the wheel over and over and over again. And there's a lot of that goes on in some of these things like nut growing. But anyway, those guys that were in the Northern Nut Growers took their very best hazelnuts that had eastern filbert blight resistance, donated them to Rutgers University. Rutgers collected every known variant of eastern filbert blight and inoculated them with them to try and kill them. They killed almost all of them, but some of ours survived. And then they gave us some seed that I planted out at Burton at Kent State, and then we distributed those. And we distributed all kinds of those around here in this part of Ohio. Plus, I took some of them and planted down there. We got some really weird variants. We got some red hazelnuts came out of that group. So it's fun to grow this stuff because you can see all kinds of different stuff come along. We've grown northern pecans. We're making progress on all that stuff, and that's, you know, I think one of the things people don't realize, you know, we've been given a lot of alternative crops here that we could grow, like walnut, pecans, you know, hazelnuts, you name it, and hickory nuts of all kinds. So you can make oil out of these things. And Big Ag has not been too interested in this, partly because of the breeding problems. But organizations like the Northern Nut Growers collected the very best. Like back when people used to collect these things, they would take them to fairs, like county fairs, state fairs, have them judged. These guys went out, found the trees, brought them back, grafted them. They have orchards full of grafted representatives of the very best of the very best. Those are fading out because these guys are dead now. And that land is going on to different relatives and that kind of thing. And there's a window of opportunity right now to collect that and keep going with it. And it's people like you that are going to do it. I don't think right now anybody else is, and it's so important. I think, you know, for the continuing the diversity of the plant material that we got out there, that we turn some of these into crops. I know I kind of hate to think of it that way all the time, but we have the opportunity. We should definitely take it. That's just some of the other stuff that grows around. I mean, we've got all this stuff out in the orchard too. And it's kind of nice because we can let that go fallow in the orchard while we wait for the chestnut crop to come on. And it provides a place in this world for insects to thrive and other animals to live. Where, you know, when you're driving through the countryside, you know, and you look at these big soybean fields and corn fields, you know, you think, oh wow, this looks pastoral, you know, it's beautiful out there. But if you walk out there, there's not a living thing in that field other than soybeans or corn. There's not a single bird that can build a nest there. There's not a single insect that can survive there. There's no other plant that can live there. And despite the looks, you know, that's a problem. You know, back when I was a kid, you know, there was plenty of weeds in corn, plenty for butterflies and stuff like that. But Roundup and these pesticides have changed that. Mm-hmm.
One thing you could do is, like, if you have like a new chestnut crop, you could go out and just like seed flowers and have people come and pick their own more of it.
Yeah, that's one of the apple farms up by us is doing that now. And yeah, that's a big thing. That's one of those things too. People like to do that and bring them into your other operation. The two will actually feed each other. And people like to support this stuff. I think a lot of them, there's a lot of people out there that realize the value of it, that it's way beyond just that chestnut. And they want to help you. Just thank God for that. And there's some of our sheep, but they're banished from the orchard.
Is anybody trying to get clarification on that law? I mean, to me, it's a common sense boo-boo, and somebody should just, but where do you start? Like,
You start by
I don't
what she
have-
said.
Well, I was just gonna ask you after, had you talked to the Extension Service food safety people? Because they're probably, because this is an Ohio food safety law, is that correct? Or is it federal?
No, national.
Okay, then you need to still get with the Extension Service to work it way up, because it goes against permaculture. You should be able to use those animals after you pick your crop, it just makes sense. For disease control as well, so if you know what the law is, I'd be willing to contact food safety people.
Take care. The Savannah Institute has been really active in getting to the bottom of that. If you can contact somebody from there, they were working on it. I think I'm pretty much done. I mean, any questions, if I can't answer them, I will.
Yeah, when we had